We're still working our way through a portion of the Gospel of John. We have been looking at the farewell words of Jesus, mainly found in John 14 to 16, though we started a few chapters before that. Next couple weeks, we're going to look at John chapter 17, where Jesus has finished his words to his disciples. But in chapter 17, he's praying to his Father, but he's praying about everything that he's just taught his disciples. Okay, and it's just his farewell words, preparing his disciples for the next period of their life. When we started this series, we looked at John chapter 12 to kind of set up the context. And in that particular sermon, I talked a little bit about stories, about the importance of stories, and about there being a meta-story or a meta-narrative, a story that includes all stories. I think I made the point back then, if you're kind of keeping up with the flow of kind of philosophy and the history of ideas, in these postmodern times, there's a high degree of skepticism about a meta-narrative, a story that explains everything. So now we much more value all the different individual stories, and they might be different. They don't have to fit together. They probably don't fit together. You know, for some people, there isn't any kind of story that explains every story. But kind of part of my argument has been, not just in this series, but we'll see as we turn to the Word in a moment, in pretty much every sermon that I preach, is that there is a story that is over every story, and every story fits, and that's actually good news. Now, this last week we've had our niece with us, Dr. Julian Sandberg. She didn't want to be announced. Don't go to her with her medical symptoms. She's not that kind of doctor. She's a doctor of Renaissance literature. Okay, so if you have a poem to show her, you can show her your poem. Don't show her some spot on her skin or something like that. She's not going to help you with that, nor will she be interested. But of course, you know, having guests here and family here brings out, you know, different conversations at home. And yesterday, for some reason, Anna was just talking about me being a little bit weird, which surprised me because I just kind of thought I'm, you know, the standard of normality. But apparently some people think I'm a little bit weird, and one way in which I think many people who know me here at this church think I'm weird is that I'm okay with spoilers in a story. You know, I would actually rather know the end of a film before I see it. And sometimes I actually find that out. You know, I want to know the story, then I'll go watch the film. I actually enjoy the film better than I can enjoy the details. To me, that makes perfect sense. I don't need the mystery. And some people like if there's a sports event and they can't watch it live, and they're going to watch it later, you know, they don't want anyone to tell them how it ended. It makes no sense to me. I want to know the end. That my team won or lost. If I just know it, then I can relax. I can enjoy the game. I can see, really seriously, I mean, you can enjoy the good play of both teams. You know, you can enjoy the skill of the game. You're not worried about the ending. Okay, I think that's normal. I've been told that that's really weird.
That is weird.
I just think I'm right. But in any case, you know, in this particular case, I think the Bible is on my side. Okay, because I think what the Bible gives us is that meta story, including the end. And because we know the whole story, not all the details, but we know the overall theme of the story, including how it ends, it tells us how to live, and it tells us that we can live confidently. Okay, and we're going to see that again in the section of John chapter 16 we're going to look at today. So as Jesus ends his teaching of the disciples in chapter 16, it ends with this. And by the way, this image that's here, this is one of my ways of trying to communicate the bigger picture, the bigger story. And, you know, if you've been here a lot, you know why I have that image, and some will become more clear. The background image is from our series on Isaiah. the picture that Tanya painted for us with the tree that's been cut off, but then the branch, I've forgotten the word that's in the Bible. It grows from the middle of this seemingly dead tree, okay? But that image is going to come back into John chapter 16. But Jesus' teaching ends, in the end of chapter 16 is, in me you have peace. In the world you have tribulation. Now isn't that true? And you know that. I mean, all of you can list different troubles you went through this last week. Some of you are students. You're in the midst of exams. Okay, that's just one of the troubles that you face. You know, you'll continue to face till you graduate. Just to clue you in, it doesn't get easier. You know, the truth is, your university years are some of the easiest in your life. It doesn't seem like that way now, but in any case, you're aware of troubles that you face now, and those are minor troubles in comparison to the sort of tribulation that some people have to live. But that's the world we live in now. I mean, in this picture, we're living here in this age, in this world, and this world is going to be characterized by trouble. Last week, John talked about that. Trouble and grace, but there's trouble in the world. But Jesus says, take courage, I've overcome the world. That world is not the final word. That world doesn't determine the story. It's not the main character in the story. So Jesus tells the disciples, take courage, I've overcome the world. If you recall, several weeks ago when we started this, in the beginning of this teaching that Jesus gives, he says, let not your heart be troubled. I mean, they're troubled because they sense that something is coming up. I mean, Jesus is, you know, what they saw, they can tell that Jesus is anticipating something that's coming. It's in his last week before the crucifixion. And Jesus is communicating something is up, something is coming, you've got to be ready. And so the disciples are going to be feeling some tension, some discomfort. And so Jesus said at the beginning of this teaching, don't let your heart be troubled. He says that immediately after he's told Peter about the defection that Peter is going to do. Peter is going to deny him. And Jesus told Peter that, but he immediately says to Peter and the others, don't let your heart be troubled. I know your weakness. But don't let your heart be troubled. I know your questions. And there's questions. The text we're going to read, the disciples are going to ask questions. That's part of the trouble in the world, is we have questions. We don't have answers to all those questions. The older I get, the fewer answers I have. That still kind of surprises me. I sort of hoped that I would have more and more answers. Things would be more and more clear. You know, again, sorry to give the bad news. You know, maybe you'll figure everything out. I sure haven't. Okay? So I have lots of questions. That's part of the trouble in the world. But don't let your heart be troubled, Jesus says. So that's kind of the context for this last part of the teaching in John chapter 16. We're going to start at verse 16 of John 16. Today I don't have the text up on the screen like I sometimes do, but if you, I'll read it out, but if you have a Bible, you can open that. Most people don't anymore. Some of you have it on your devices, so that's where the Sandberg family, always been up to date with technology. They've got it. In verse 16 of John 16, Jesus says, in a little while you will see me no more. Then after a little while you will see me. Part of the trouble for the disciples. What is that about? In a little while they're not going to see him because he's going to be dead. And he's going to be in the grave. There's going to be that period of despair and desperation on the part of the disciples. They're not going to see him. They spent 2+ years following him, and now it's like those days are over. What's up? But then after a while you will see him, because he's going to be raised from the dead, and he'll be with them again. Some of his disciples said to one another, what does he mean by this? A little while, is that a little while? What is that about? So they kept asking, what does this mean? We don't understand. Jesus saw that they wanted to ask him about this, so he said to them, are you asking one another what I meant when I said in a little while you will see me no more, then after a little while you will see me? I tell you the truth, you will weep and mourn, while the world rejoices. The leaders in Jerusalem are going to rejoice. Good, we got rid of that rebel, that guy who's kind of upsetting our system. The guy who's messing up our status quo, our comfortable life we've carved out for ourselves in the middle of this Roman Empire. This Jesus guy has been messing that up. But thankfully we got rid of him. So that's good news. We can rejoice that pest is off the scene. You're going to weep while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will be turned to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby has been born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy. The child has been born into the world. Jesus here, by the way, is thinking about the big story. If you remember the series in Isaiah, several times Isaiah gives that image of a woman in labor waiting to give birth. Okay, so Jesus doesn't kind of arbitrarily choose this image now. He's reminding his disciples of texts that they have read before. It's his way of saying, remember, this is part of the story. The guy several hundred years ago used this image. It's the same image with the same meaning. So when a woman is in labor, it's a time of, well, labor and pain. I didn't have to experience that firsthand, just a little bit vicariously. But then the joy comes. It's amazing. I mean, especially, mothers who have had more than one children. It's like, what are they thinking? After all that pain the first time, why in the world would they do that again? That's like the stupidest thing in the world. No, they know because after the labor comes this joy. So with you, Jesus tells the disciples, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy. They'll see him again when he's raised from the dead, but then he's going to ascend to heaven, but that's okay, because he's going to send the Holy Spirit. Jesus will be with them in the Spirit. And they're going to see him again when he comes back. So Jesus is looking ahead to all these different ways in which ultimately he will be with his disciples. We made that point a number of times. You're not alone. We are not alone in this world. At no time and at no place are you ever alone. Because this world belongs to Jesus. In that day, you'll no longer ask me anything. I tell you the truth, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. This has come up several times now in this teaching. Jesus talked about asking the Father and the Father answering him. We're going to look again about what Jesus is thinking as he says this. In that day, you'll no longer ask me anything. I tell you the truth, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Until now, you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask and you will receive, that your joy may be complete. Though I have been speaking figuratively, a time is coming when I will no longer use this kind of language, but will tell you plainly about my Father. In that day you will ask in my name. I'm not saying that I will ask the Father on your behalf. Well, why not? I mean, that might seem like bad news. I mean, Jesus isn't going to speak to the disciples? No. The Father himself loves you. The Father himself loves you, Jesus says. The Father himself loves you. You don't need anyone between you and the Father because the Father himself loves you. The Father himself loves you. That's why you can talk to him, because he's the Father and he loves you. The Father himself loves you. Because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. I came from the Father and entered the world. Now I'm leaving the world and going back to the Father. Then Jesus' disciples said, okay, now you're speaking clearly, without figurative speech. Now we get it. Now we can see that you know all things. You know the story. And that you do not need anyone to even ask you questions. This makes us believe that you come from God. You believe at last, Jesus answered. He might be slightly sarcastic because, of course, these guys don't quite fully understand. They don't quite fully believe. But they're getting there, and they're on the path. And so whatever step they're making, that's good. You got that, Jesus said. But the time is coming and has come when you're going to be scattered, each to his own home. You will leave me all alone. Yet I'm not alone, for my Father is with me. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. So we see some of the troubles that the disciples have, and they're not major troubles yet. They got this trouble of having questions and not understanding everything Jesus is saying. They got the trouble of their own inherent weakness. So Jesus says, now to all of that, you're going to leave me alone. You're going to abandon me. Peter will have a very brief moment of courage, and then suddenly they're all going to run. And they're all going to hide. Okay, so that's part of their trouble. They're not great men. At least not yet. They're pretty much normal guys. They're going to abandon Jesus, the one who loves them, and yet Jesus says, you're going to have peace in me. In the world you have trouble. Take heart. I've overcome the world. This is possible, and we can live this out only if we understand this story that Jesus is living and that he's communicating, where everything fits. So I just want to go back over this story. Okay, this is the story we've got to get. This is the story that will explain everything else, or at least will give us confidence in our unanswered questions. God has a people. Always has a people. He's always worked with people. From Adam and Eve on, God has always worked through people. When God is going to do something, he's going to do it through people. Always. Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, David, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. God has a people, and these people have a relationship with him. God enters into a more personal relationship with people. But especially, these people are the instruments of his good purposes in the world. God has a people to do his work in the world, to bring his blessing to the world. That's why he chooses them. We've seen that a number of times. When God chooses people, it's not just about this. It's mainly about this. It's mainly about their role in the world. God's good plan for the world. He has a people to make sure his blessing reaches to people. And this is covenant. This is what God's covenant is about. The promises that he makes. He promises to bless people and to be in a relationship with them, and then to bless the nations through them. This is the agreement that God makes with people. So that word covenant is a word that is all through the Bible. I mean, the Bible that we use, the Old Testament, the New Testament, that's the Old Covenant, the New Covenant, but it's really one covenant. It's one story, one kind of agreement that God makes with people. But the reality is, and we see this all through the Old Testament, that God's people never really live into the covenant. They don't quite keep all the rules. And they don't quite fulfill all the purposes. Some do better than others. Some are just complete and utter failures from almost the beginning. But there's always some also who are on the path that are trying to obey. They have weaknesses and failures, like Abraham, the friend of God. The friend of God, this epitome of faith, had moments of weak faith. That's not good news to us, that these are the kind of people that God uses. But the point is, Abraham had his own problems, and David had his own problems. A man after God's own heart also committed adultery and murder. So even the great ones don't quite make it. When we look at the book of Isaiah, remember there was that disappointing turn. Hezekiah, the greatest king after David, had this disappointing turn. So God's people never really fulfill the covenant like they're supposed to. Okay, none of them quite manages it. But one of the important things is that God is faithful. God is faithful. He made the covenant. He chose to do it. He wasn't forced to, but he did it out of love because he's God and he's faithful to it. He's going to be faithful to the story. The story is never going to change. God never changes the direction of this story. The purpose and how. He doesn't change in that sense. He's going to be faithful to his covenant. When people are faithless, he is faithful. And so in order for his purpose to be fulfilled, God himself in human form is going to come. Jesus, Messiah, the sent one. And the word Messiah tells us part of the story because this Messiah was promised. Before he came, he was promised. Because God had the story in mind. And God could say, this is going to happen in the story because I already see it. I'm going to do it because I've got this story figured out. So God himself is going to step in to fulfill the covenant. And Jesus is going to come. Jesus is a person. Jesus has a relationship. And Jesus is an instrument of God's good purpose in the world. It's the same thing. It's the same story. God hasn't changed what he's doing. It's the same purpose and the same way of doing it. But it's like God had to take it fully into his own hands. And he did that by sending his son in human form. That's one of the reasons why this incarnation, this Christian doctrine of God becoming flesh is absolutely necessary. It's the only way for God to fulfill his plan. It's got to be God, and it's got to be human. And that's Jesus. In the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, if you remember, one of the ways in which this theme is communicated is through the image of the vineyard. And that comes up several times in Isaiah, and one of them is found in Isaiah chapter 5, and we looked at this passage many months ago. I will sing for the one I love, the song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up, cleared it of stones, planted it with choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it. He cut out a wine press as well. And he looked for a crop of good grapes. God has a people. God had a vineyard. And he was looking for fruit. And God had this relationship with this vineyard. And he did all these things for it to bring forth fruit. But here in this text, he looked for a crop of good grapes, but only bad fruit. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the house of Israel. The men of Judah are the garden of his delight. And he looked for justice, but bloodshed. And he looked for righteousness. They only heard cries of distress. It's the same story. And this vineyard is one of the images that comes up in Jesus' farewell words. Same story, same image, a vineyard. There's supposed to be fruit, but there wasn't. So we see in this Old Testament, and another way in which I've tried to communicate this kind of meta story is that when God began the story, he's working with all of humanity. But as time went on, there's a narrower and narrower group of people who would actually fulfill the covenant, the people through whom God could work. Out of all of humanity, there was Abraham, the Jewish people. Out of all the Jewish people, the tribe of Judah. And out of the tribe of Judah, just a remnant. And it just said, fewer and fewer people that were instruments of God's work until it was all focused on one person, Jesus, who would actually bring to fulfillment everything that God had in mind. So Jesus, Messiah, the Christ, is sent. He is sent by the Father. And this is the main thing the Gospel of John tells us about Jesus. He's the sent one. 16 of 21 chapters. Jesus says, I was sent by the Father. I was sent by the Father. That's the main thing that this Gospel tells about Jesus. He was sent. It tells us God has a purpose. And he's doing something about his purpose. Jesus is the sent one. And he obeys the Father. He does the Father's works and speaks the Father's words. And this comes up repeatedly in John. Jesus keeps reminding them, the words that I say, they're the Father's words. What I'm doing is what I have seen the Father do. I'm doing his works. And so Jesus kept the commands of the Father, and then he prays to his Father, and he's heard. He speaks to the Father. And the Father hears him. Of course the Father hears him. He's the Son. And the Father is the Father. Of course the Father is going to hear his Son who he sent. And he loves and is loved by the Father. And so Jesus is the true vine. That's what Jesus says in chapter 15, where Jesus goes back to the image of the vineyard. And Jesus talks about, when there's no fruit, what does the vine dresser do? Well, there's absolutely no fruit. He cuts it off and he burns it because the fruit is necessary. Okay, the disciples know exactly what Jesus is talking about. And then Jesus says, I'm the true vine. I'm the fulfillment of everything the Father is doing. I'm the one who's going to finally do it. I'm the one who's going to fully live out of the covenant and make the covenant possible again. He is the true vine. What his people were supposed to be but didn't quite manage to be. God is faithful. And he sends Jesus, and Jesus is the true vine. And so that comes up actually again in Isaiah chapter 27. Chapter 5, it's kind of this negative image of the vine, but that's not the end of the story. The useless vineyard is not the end of the story. In Isaiah 27, sing about a fruitful vineyard. I, the Lord, watch over it. I water it continually. I guard it day and night, so that no harm or no one may harm it. I'm not angry. If only there were briars and thorns in front of me, I would march against them in battle. I would set them all on fire. Or else let them come to me for refuge. Let them make peace with me. Yes, let them make peace with me. In days to come, Jacob will take root. Israel will bud and blossom, and fill all the world with fruit. Actually, God's covenant will be fulfilled. And there actually will be a people, will continue to be a weak sort of people, but they will actually be able to bear fruit. And so as the story moves on, as a matter of fact, after Jesus, then there's the disciples. They're just kind of regular guys, but when they're filled with the Spirit, there's fruit. And a church is going to come, and there's going to be more converts. There's going to be 12, there's going to be 100, and then there's going to be thousands. So Jesus is going to have disciples, his follower friends. That's what it means to be a disciple. It's not someone who goes to church. It's someone who's following Jesus. They strive to follow Jesus. Of course, in chapter 15, Jesus says, you're my friends. You're my friends. You're a disciple, but you're my friends. And so they are sent like Jesus. This hasn't come up explicitly yet. It's going to be clear in the next chapter. And then again, the last part of the Gospel of John, Jesus is going to say, as the Father sent me, I'm sending you. Just as the Father sends me, I'm sending you. It's good news. You get to be a sent one. You get to be like Jesus. You get to live out of the covenant again. It's possible. Jesus wants you in that role. You get to be like Jesus. You get to follow Jesus. You get to bear fruit like Jesus. He's going to send us in the same way that he was sent. And they are to have Jesus' words living in them. The Word is going to change them, and then His words will continue to transform them. They will abide in Jesus, and one way they'll do that is by abiding in His words, paying attention to His words, what He said, what He taught, bringing them to mind. It's a pretty easy thing to do because a lot of them are found right here in this book. It's quite easy. In our day and time, when all of you can read, there's literally nothing preventing you, especially here in Latvia, from opening your Bibles and reading the words of Jesus. It's the easiest thing in the world. For you, for us. For some people in the world right now, it's not so easy. Some Christians have never been taught to read. It's harder. Some Christians, some places maybe don't have Jesus' words. It's harder for them. But we're not there. We're the people who have his words. Okay, so we can live in the words of Jesus and keep his commands. And this has come up already in this part of the Gospel of John we've been looking at. That especially in the part we're looking at today, they pray and are heard by the Father. They too can speak to the Father. They don't need Jesus anymore to speak for them. They can speak directly to the Father. Because the Father loves them. And they love and are loved by the Father. So this is the story. This is the story in a sense from beginning to end. This is, if you want, like, the center of theology, if you want the main answers to the important questions, it's right there on one slide. I don't want to say that this is inspired. I wish I could say this is inspired. But all I can say is, testify to myself, is I see just that. Most of my questions are answered. I mean, in simple terms, for instance, Jesus talks about praying in the name of Jesus. You know, it's not like anything we ask for necessarily God obligates himself to give. Jesus said, pray in his name. What does that mean? Well, just look here. To pray the prayers that this guy would pray. Okay? That tells us something about what it means to pray in the name of Jesus. The person who is doing this, who left heaven to come to earth. That person, his name. What did he care about when he was on earth? You know, a Mercedes donkey to ride on? When you needed a donkey, you have a donkey. You can pray for a car. You know, if you need a Mercedes, pray for a Mercedes. But if you don't need a Mercedes, maybe don't pray for Mercedes in Jesus' name, because I'm not sure. I don't know, but I'm not sure that this Jesus was praying for his third private jet. Okay? I myself don't see that. But in any case, all I'm saying is this answers questions like this. The story, it's the story that tells us something about God. A lot of the theology books that I had to read in seminary, their way of talking about God was, God is this, he's omnipotent and omniscient, and there's these words and so forth, and a whole list of words that describe God and so forth. And that can be a legitimate way to understand God, but that's not. The Bible doesn't use those words to tell us about God. The way the Bible reveals God is through story, through what God does. This tells us about God. This explains, this meta-narrative answers questions. So for me, for instance, one of the things I've talked a lot about is, what does it mean to be chosen? When God chooses people, does it mean God chooses some people to go to heaven when they die, and everyone else, well, no. When God chooses people, it's about mission. And that's the story. All through the story, God chooses people for mission. Yes, they have a relationship with Him. But the choosing, I'm choosing you for a purpose. Jesus said explicitly, you've not chosen me, I've chosen you that you should go and bear fruit. And that's what choosing, that idea, what is God's choice and so forth, predestination, election, that afflicts theologians and different, even with my brothers, we're on some slightly different pages on that, but at least for me, I might be wrong. But when I look at that story, to me, I find the answer to that question. And this good news that God chooses people for His purposes. Another thing that this story helps me to answer, especially Jesus in the center, is the relationship of faith and works. Okay? That's, for those of us who might be from Protestant churches, that's kind of one of the big things. We're saved by faith, not by works. But ever since the time of Martin Luther, often Christians have had a hard time explaining why works are important. If it's just faith, where do works fit in? Are they really necessary or not? And that just struggles with people, because some people are afraid, well, if you talk about, keeping commandments, that's just legalism again. If you're doing works, well, then you're earning something. No. See, Jesus kept the commands of the Father. Jesus too had to keep the commandments of the Father. He didn't earn the Father's love. We don't earn His love through works. Okay, that's what this story tells us. The Father loves us. We still have to do works. We still have to keep His commands. Okay, that's just part of what a relationship is. Just like Jesus had to. And of course He did, because He was His Son. But He didn't earn the Father's love. Okay? We come to a relationship by faith. And it starts with God. But of course our life needs to be different. I mean, if we're following Jesus, our life will be different. Again, all I'm saying is, looking at this story maybe gives us a direction to try to figure out some of those kind of theological problems that this story begins to clarify some things for us. Especially Jesus in the center of the story. Jesus said, remember in John 14, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. He's the answer to the question. If you want to figure out what things mean in the Bible, start with Jesus. Okay? There might be more things you need to look at, but start with Jesus, the one who's in the center of the story. It's about Jesus. He's in the center of the story. But in this text that we're looking at in John chapter 16, understanding this meta-narrative, especially is related back to this point about our view of the world and our place in the world. In me, you're going to have peace. In the world, you'll have tribulation. But take heart, I've overcome the world. Okay? And we can only live that way if we understand the whole story. If we see the spoiler. I mean, again, God was giving spoilers all through the story. Isaiah already told us the end of the story. We didn't need to read the book of Revelation. He already told Isaiah the end of the story. Okay, and he had been giving hints of the end of the story all along. God was constantly giving spoilers. And as a way to tell people, this world is in my hands. You're safe. You're safe in this story. Yeah, you're in the midst of trouble right now. Sure. But your right now is only part of the story. Of course, this is why it's hard for us, why we need so much faith maybe to get this, because of course we're living our own particular story, and my story fills my life right now. Maybe we all have this tendency to more or less see ourselves in the center of the universe. And so obviously I fill my life, because I kind of have to. I've got to eat and put on clothes, and I've got to think about all those things. And it's easy to think this is all of life. My whatever number of years is all of life. That my present fills my life. And the reality is, this present part of our story is a short story. It's not an epic novel. Okay, it's actually just a short story. In the middle of it might seem long, but if you step back and you say, oh, that's just a little bit of... My father died a couple months ago, 93 years old. That's a pretty long time to live. Pretty good. And he got, and he lasted pretty well to the end. His mind was mainly there. He was living a life of fruit till the end. But his early life was a struggle. He was an orphan, so he felt abandoned, and that affected the rest of his life, including my life. The fact that my father was an orphan affected me. I'm part of who I am because my father was an orphan. That's just how it is. Okay, but 93 years might have seemed like a long time. My father filled my life. He was alive most of my life until the last couple of months. But now, my father understands, my life is just a short story. And he sees better than us the big story. And he understands how true this is. And even maybe could have been when he was alive. So our present life, though it seems overwhelming, is actually a little bit of the story. And this is why we need some kind of a reminder that there is this bigger story. I don't want to talk too much about the importance of like coming to church, but to me this is one of the importance of coming to a meeting like this. Because we at least need a weekly reminder that the rest of our life is not all of life. That Monday to Saturday is not all of life. I mean, probably Sunday morning is not enough. We just need some kind of reminder, oh yeah, there's another story. At least minimally, that reminder that we're living as part of another story, and that story has already been plotted out, and the end is assured. And one of the reasons we know the end is assured, because so much has already happened, just like the Father planned. Jesus has come. He promised that for a long time, and it happened. And they killed him. It didn't matter because he was alive. I mean, evil did its worst. The worst that evil could possibly do was the cross. That was the worst. Satan and the world can do no greater harm than killing Jesus. And in that moment, God won. In that moment, Jesus, when evil did its worst, it lost. It lost. And it can't do any worse. That's why Jesus said, I've overcome the world. The prince of this world is cast out. He's running around almost like a chicken with his head cut off. Yeah, he's doing some damage, but he's already dying. And his kingdom is already dying. And God's kingdom is already coming in. The worst that evil can do, it did. And in that very second, it lost. Jesus says, I've overcome the world. I don't often post these kinds of memes on Facebook. I generally don't do that. Some of them are always a little bit corny to me. So this isn't my style generally. Nevertheless, occasionally even on Facebook, good reminders pop up. And so these are just some more or less at random. God has this. Keep calm, because God's got this. No worries, I got it. God says. You don't have this. Just like Peter and the disciples didn't really have it. They didn't really have themselves, but God did. Just like last time, God's got this. And then our own image for this week that I think John has created, God has this. And that's what Jesus is saying in this particular part of his teaching. And his kind of basis for that is just bringing his disciples into the story. This is the story you're in. Okay, I know all about it. I know from the beginning of the story. I know the future of the story. And I know your place in it. But it's in my hands. I've got this. In the world, you're going to have trouble. The troubles aren't going to end yet. But they will. And the troubles are actually just a small part of the story. We're living in this meta story that's in God's hands. Don't let your heart be troubled.